Welcome to this webinar organized by ETUN, the European Trade Union Network for Justice in Palestine. Today, just ahead of the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people, which, as you know, is November 29th every year. Okay, so let me start the introduction. I'm Dror Warschawski from ETUN. And so what is ETUN, the network that is organizing this webinar discussion? So ETUN stands from European Trade Union Network for Justice in Palestine. It's a network that was launched in 2016 by a coalition of European trade unions aiming to build an effective network in solidarity with the Palestinian people and workers by taking concrete and effective action towards three main goals. One is the end to Israel's illegal occupation. Two is the implementation of UN resolutions. And three, to aim for just and equitable peace for all. So our network is a network of 34 European trade unions, altogether representing over 6 million workers in Europe. And because it's a European network, it's particularly committed to challenging European governments, the European Union, European pension funds, and European corporate complicity supporting Israel's occupation. And this includes the European Israel Association Agreement, the European Union Israel Association Agreement, because this agreement grants Israel preferential access to European markets. It allows Israeli ministries and weapons companies to receive EU fundings, and it provides Israel with political support. So one of our main goals is to call for the EU-Israel Association Agreement to be suspended, at least until Israel complies by the human rights obligations in the treaty. What does ETUN do? So ETUN coordinates campaigns, it produces briefing, and it organizes conferences on Palestinian rights, such as the one you're following today. So you can keep in touch with us by following our webpage. So it's etun-palestine.org or our Facebook page. And if your union is not a member of ETUN, try to convince them to join. Last December, ETUN published a report called European Complicity with Israel's Occupation, Undermining Palestinian Rights to Decent Work. This report was researched and written by RIYA and SANAH, one of our panelists today, and also with contribution by several members of ETUN. This year, we have also published a couple of statements, one regarding Israel's annexation plans, and one regarding Histadrut's complicity with the discrimination of Palestinian workers during the COVID pandemic. We are now in the process of writing 112 letters to the 112 companies that have been singled out by the UN database of companies that are complicit with the illegal Israeli settlements. We will talk about this database more and about all these issues during our conversation today. So today we're going to hear more about the situation from the ground from leading trade unionists and experts on worker rights. So I'm going to present you our four panelists today. So I'm going to start with RIYA Al-Sanah. She's a researcher coordination at Who Profits from the Occupation Research Center, which focuses on exposing corporate complicity in Israel's ongoing occupation of Palestinian and Syrian land. RIYA has authored a number of reports on the conditions of Palestinian labor, including the Who Profits, ETUN, and an upcoming report for ITUC. She is currently working on a research project with the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation on the impact of COVID-19 on Palestinian labor in the West Bank and Gaza. Next is ABED DARI. ABED is from East Jerusalem. He has been working at Kavlaoved since 2011 as a field coordinator for Palestinian workers in the West Bank. Kavlaoved is involved in three types of activities. One is education and awareness, either in workshops or face-to-face, in cooperations with Palestinian trade unions. Two is taking cases to labor courts. Three is pursuing legal actions against labor law infraction on behalf of workers. And ABED is specialized in work accidents and labor laws. He meets with workers in the West Bank every Saturday for consulting, answering phone calls, and managing the Facebook page. Next, in alphabetical order, is Mohammed MOTAWA. He's been working as a project coordinator for the Union of Agricultural Work Committee in the West Bank for the past 13 years. He holds a BS degree in plant protection and production from Al-Najah National University in Nablus, and he has 15 years of experience in the analysis of the value chain of agricultural sector in Palestine. He has also been a member of the olive oil testing panel for 12 years, operating and maintaining olive mills, producing high-quality olive oils, but also writing scientific research and technical papers, for example, about characterization of Palestinian olive cultivar and olive oil, or also about the influence of complementary irrigation with treated wastewater on the productivity of olives and olive oil. And last but not least, LAMIA SHALALDEN. She's a mother of 4 children and holds a master's degree in sustainable development from Al-Quds University in Al-Quds. During the first Intifada in the late 80s, she already used to organize public education for students at their homes and at most in the Hebron area as a response to Israeli closing school in Palestine. She's an experienced consulting and trainer in the field of human rights in general and women rights in particular. Today, LAMIA works with women production cooperatives to develop the capabilities of working women. She also writes policy papers submitted to the government to improve the status of women cooperatives and has conducted gender audit for NGOs in Palestine, Sudan, Libya, and Tunisia. But so I'm going to then switch to Mohammed, if you can hear us. And so also about COVID, can you maybe summarize the impact that COVID-19 had specifically on workers in the West Bank and in Gaza, and how the PA and Hamas responded in the West Bank and Gaza, respectively?
Okay, thank you for you, Dror, and for the invitation to explain for all the world what's happened during COVID-19 pandemic in the West Bank and Gaza. Actually, I will explain the thing, and I will start with talking about the labor marketing. In my opinion, over the pandemic, several business, in particular small enterprises, were not able to survive or continue in their work due to the pandemic and the closure. And almost of them have been closed forever. Thousands of workers lost their job. Factory closed their door in the first 3 months or 4 months, and more than, let's say, thousands of drivers have been a large reduction in their income because there is due to the restriction of movement. The crisis also increased the ratio of the poverty and in food insecurity within more than, let's say, the ratio it's reached 10% in the poverty rate. Actually, COVID-19 has made worse the sense of the severe and sensitive social problem in Gaza, especially humanitarian worker report, and it's an increase of gender-based and other forms of violence, as well as the depression, drug use, and self-harm. Before the outbreak of Corona, was Gaza, as everybody knows, really under the weight of last spring. 3 months lockdown and the pandemic wider global economic impact. The renewed lockdown is like it's became a worse situation more than the other. In West Bank also, almost worker has lost their works, particularly the lockdown period from the Palestinian and the Israeli side. Do you know there's more than or around 54% from the worker were absent from work due to the lockdown and the closure and the declaration of emergency and the closure of all private and public institutions as a result of the restriction or the action imposed by the government to face the crisis. In addition to whom currently for 14 days, also in the state is a main reason for absent absenteeism, with a percentage 75 as well as 51 of workers in industrial sector has been affected and absent from the work. In addition to pandemic affected the worker in the agriculture sector. More than here 10% of those main income earner who stopped working during the lockdown period from the 3, 4, 5 months of the crisis, who work in the agriculture sector. Also, 8% declined in the economy of the Palestine. More than 121,000 Palestinians have lost their job in the whole years. Let's say in the second quarter of the years. The statistic issued that the labor force survey of the third quarter, which show that the unemployment rate it's raised, it's moved up actually from to reach more than within 10%. Also, COVID-19 is because due to the restriction for, let's say, there's a percent of household they cannot access to the services, especially particularly the healthcare service. The most important reason why the hospital and the health care center is a little bit far. Also, we know that the Palestinian household income declines, or the food security is affected by the pandemic crisis, because the Palestinian household declined to have a more during the pandemic period compared to the last year, from 46 in the West Bank and 38 in Gaza Strip. In case of lockdown, it's became as 63 of household can cover their expenditure for a month or less, 62% in the West Bank and 68 in Gaza Strip, while 10% of household can cover their expenses for 4 months, more than 9 the West Bank and 11 Gaza Strip. Actually, 61 of the household are aware about not having enough food, because the food security during the pandemic is not easy actually. For the other part of your question, it's the response. The government of Palestinian has made an action during this period. Actually, they make over the past this crisis. They start with the closure of all the schools, university, and public parts. Closure of border, a movement. Just a movement of goods in the border. The no movement between West Bank governorate. Palestinian labor who travel to Israel for work are asked not to move between state of Palestine and Israel. This means that they should return to their homes and remain on the Palestinian home quarantine for 2 weeks, or remain Israeli until the situation change. And the situation actually is not changed till now. No movement with all Europeans except for exceptional circumstances, with all citizens requested to remain with their homes. Closure of all stores, public institutions, and government offices except for essential provider, pharmacies, and food, and Ministry of Health, Finance, and all citizens are asked to stay at home except for essential activity and emergency. Actually, and all the NGOs, there is a cooperation between the NGOs and or international even, or at the national level. I will talk about the action of IWAC. It's look like the other organization. We start with support. We start with make a appeal for all the donors to let them understand what the situation in the ground, and we start with actually to support the Bedouin, or the person or the household who live in the area C, or who can't reach the health service. We distributed the healthcare hygienic kits and the other tools for resistant virus, and we distributing also the same time brochures to its farmers and the Bedouin and the people who lives in the area C about the virus or the crisis. Also, we try to support the people or the household with the to save the food security, to secure the food, actually at least a basic need. We start to introduce the new techniques. It's called agriculture truth for let's say like a home garden, but it's in the roof of the building or in the roof in the home, instead of cultivating the thing in the land, and it will be improve or contribute to secure their food. And in the other hand, we start to we distributed thousands of basket foods for the household or the person who infected with the virus corona, and we're still going to support those infected people.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mohammed, for these testimonies from the ground. And I'm going to move to Lamia. Lamia, can you hear me? I want to focus on specific aspects of the COVID-19 pandemic. And can you tell us maybe about the specific effect that it had on women? Apparently, in many countries, COVID had a disproportionate impact on women. So is it also the case was it also the case in Palestine?
مساء الخير.
مساء الخير.
بداية بشكركم جدا على دعوتي للمشاركة في هاي الإيفنت، وبشكركم كمان على جهدكم اللي بتبذلوه في مناهضة حقوق وتضامن مع الفلسطينيين بشكل خاص. كمان يعني بصادف المضبوط هذا الإيفنت اللي هو مع يوم التضامن مع الشعب الفلسطيني وقضاياه العادلة. بنتمنى لو طبعا يتحقق على الأرض واقع العدالة الاجتماعية والحقوقية الإنسانية على الأرض الفلسطينية، وكلنا أمل بالجهود اللي تبذل من يعني الأحرار في العالم كله من أجل إحقاق حقوق الشعب الفلسطيني وكل الشعوب المضطهدة.
لاميا،
نعم
راح أترجم هلأ، بس المرة الجاية لازم تحكي كتير أقصر من هيك.
ولا يهمك.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the invitation and for organizing this panel. It comes in a special week, the International Week of Solidarity with Palestine, in which we hope, with the support of all the freedom fighters around the world, that we will able to achieve justice and freedom in Palestine.
بداية بتفق مع أنه كل النساء في العالم والشعوب العالم كلها تأثرت بكوفيد.
At the beginning, I agree that women in all around the globe were impacted by COVID-19.
ولكن النساء الفلسطينيات معاناتهن وتأثرهن مضاعف.
But the Palestinian women's suffering is doubled.
والسبب إن هم عم بيواجهوا جائحة كورونا من جهة، ولكن بيواجهوا فيروس أخطر على الإطلاق اللي هو فيروس الاحتلال الصهيوني الاستعماري.
Because while we are dealing with the consequences of COVID, at the same time we are confronting a much more dangerous virus, which is the illegal occupation of Palestine, the colonial occupation of Palestine.
وللأسف الاحتلال الصهيوني عم بيحاول يستغل انشغال العالم بكوفيد 19.
Unfortunately, the Israeli occupation is trying to use the fact that the world is preoccupied with COVID-19.
ويقوم بإجراءات وسياسات ممنهجة ضد الفلسطينيين والفلسطينيات بشكل كبير جدا.
And they are implementing organized policies against Palestinians, men and women, in large scale.
منها على سبيل المثال حجز الأموال الفلسطينية,
such as the blocking of the Palestinian taxes,
بالإضافة لمنع العديد من التجمعات السكانية الفلسطينية من الوصول للمياه والموارد الطبيعية,
prohibiting several communities, Palestinian communities, from reaching water and natural resources.
وهذا مثلا هاي الجزئية بالذات أثرت بشكل كبير جدا على النساء وزيادة معاناة النساء.
And this detail in specific impacted lots of communities and especially the women.
خاصة في مجال النظافة وفي مجال زيادة العبء على النساء لتوفير المياه للشرب اللي هي لأسرهم وأفراد أسرهم.
Especially in hygiene aspect, and also to be able to provide healthy water for drinking for the women and their families.
لأن النساء بتضطر تقطع مسافات طويلة من أجل جلب المياه للأسر في التجمعات السكانية النائية.
Because in those marginalized gatherings and communities, the women are obliged to cross large distances to be able to bring drinkable water to their families.
الجزء الثاني كثف الاحتلال من هدم المنازل وتشتيت الأسر الفلسطينية بهدف التهجير القسري من أماكن سكناهم.
At the same time, they have increased the demolishing of houses and communities with the aim of displacing the people from their places of living.
وكان آخرها قبل يومين في قرية حمصة اللي دمرها بالكامل. وشرد 79 فرد.
The last one was 2 days ago in the village of Homsa, where they totally destroyed it and displaced 79 persons.
وهيك أصبح 52 أسرة تقريبا هي في العراء بدون سكن وبدون مأوى.
And by that, 52 families are now living without any housing, without any shelter.
وإذا بدي أربط هذا الموضوع بواقع النساء تحديدا أو أثره على حياة النساء المركز الحماية الأول هو المنزل أو البيت اللي بتسكن فيه.
And if I want to connect this action with the women interest and aspect, then the first protection space for women is their house or the place where they live in.
بحالة التدمير والتهجير القسري بيفقد النساء أول مصدر أو مركز حماية لهن.
With this aspect of demolishing of their places and displacement, they lose the first line of protection that they have.
بالجزء الثاني اللي هو موضوع مصادرة مصادر الرزق الأساسية للنساء الريفيات اللي هي مصادرة الأراضي الزراعية وحرقها.
The other aspect is the confiscation of the main source of living for the villagers, women villagers and farmers, by confiscating the land and demolishing or destroying and burning their production.
وبهاي الحالة بزيد من حالة فقر النساء والحاجة تاعت النساء والفتيات وبالإضافة لفقر الأسر بشكل عام.
And by that they increase the poverty between women and the young girls, and they also increase the poverty between families in general.
حتى النساء العاملات في مجال التعاونيات والوحدات الإنتاجية المنزلية
even women who work in small production projects.
بحالة مصادرة الأراضي وتدميرها هن بفقدن المورد الرئيسي أو المصدر الرئيسي لتوريد المواد الخام.
By confiscation of land and burning productions, they lose the first resource that they have for materials that they use in their own production.
بالجانب الآخر موضوع كوفيد وتأثيره على النساء، يعني طبعا هذا جزء بسيط من ممارسات الاحتلال، يعني ما بننسى موضوع القتل، العمد، موضوع الاعتقال للعديد من النساء والطالبات الجامعيات في الفترة الأخيرة واستهدافهم.
These are only small aspects of the practices of the Israeli occupation against women in Palestine. We don't forget the killings and assassination of women, the detention of women, and all those practices too.
Thank you.
بالجانب الآخر إذا بنتحدث عن غزة وحالة الحصار المستمرة لقطاع غزة وحرمان السكان الأصليين في غزة، الشعب الفلسطيني نساء ورجالا، من كافة اللي هي مقومات الحياة الأساسية.
On the other hand, if we talk about Gaza and the blockage around Gaza and prohibiting all the residents of Gaza from the basic sources of or needs for life.
وتحديدا بنتحدث عن اللي هي الكهرباء والمياه بشكل رئيسي، وحرية التنقل والوصول للعلاج في أماكن خارج نطاق غزة.
We can talk mainly about electricity, water, and medicine, and right of movement in and out of Gaza.
طبعا عادة بيكون مضاعفة أو آثار هاي السياسات الممنهجة على النساء بشكل أكبر، بحكم الواقع الاجتماعي اللي بتعيشه النساء، بحكم الواقع الاقتصادي الصعب، وبحكم كمان اللي هي الثقافة المجتمعية. يعني بتتقاطع أحيانا ثقافة مجتمعية مع سياسات احتلال، النساء بتطلع الخاسر الأكبر بهاي العملية كلها.
In those situations, women are they have the bigger loss because of the socio-economical reality of their lives. With all those aspects, the impact is much more normally on women than on the other groups of society.
وإذا بدي أكثر أركز بصراحة بهاي الجزئية، بدي أرجع للنساء الريفيات والنساء في المناطق المهمشة والنساء العاملات في مجال القطاع التعاوني أو العمل الإنتاجي. بهاي الجزئية راح أستعرض جزء بسيط.
And if I want to give more focus, I would look more into the women who live in marginalized areas, isolated communities, women who work in agriculture aspects or in cooperatives, small production projects.
فعلى سبيل المثال عدد كبير من التعاونيات النسائية الإنتاجية هي كان لها دور أساسي في الحفاظ على الأمن الغذائي للأسر.
For example, many of those women working in those small production projects, they had a main element in keeping the food security for the families.
وكانت على طريق تحقيق موضوع اللي هو أو عم بتصير قدما اتجاه تحقيق السيادة على الغذاء من خلال إنتاجها الوطني المحلي.
And they were on the steps forward in the road of achieving that food security, depending on the local production.
ولكن موضوع كوفيد-19 وموضوع الاحتلال بسياساته أعاق هاي المجموعات النسوية من استكمال العمل أو استدامة العمل في هذا الاتجاه.
But with both the consequences of COVID-19 and the policies and practices of the Israeli occupation, it prohibited and prevented those women to continue their projects and their production.
وللأسف برضو قصور صناع القرار الفلسطيني من الاهتمام بهاي الفئة والمساعدة على دعمهم في الاستدامة في هذا الاتجاه الإنتاجي، كمان هذا ضاعف من المشكلة.
And unfortunately, the lack of support from the decision makers on the Palestinian side, like in the Palestinian Authority, also didn't help and added an increase to the problem that they are facing.
يعني هاي الأسباب اللي جعلت كتير من التعاونيات الإنتاجية إنها تأثرت بشكل كتير كبير، عكس حاله على واقع الأسر الفلسطينية والنساء بشكل خاص.
So
فقر وتهميش.
Those reasons on those small project productions and women working there impacted negatively their lives, which also had their impact on the families by being marginalized and increasing their level of poverty.
رح أختم بس ببعض نماذج نجاح رغم كل هاي التحديات اللي واجهت النساء، إلا أنه عدد من برضو التعاونيات النسائية والنساء الريفيات بادروا ببعض القضايا أو الأنشطة اللي ساعدت ودعمت عدد آخر من الأسر على الحفاظ على تلبية الاحتياجات الأساسية لها بالتحديد من الغذاء.
Having said that, I want to conclude by some examples of success from women in those some of those small projects, that they were proactive, took initiatives to resolve some of the crises and situations that impacted families as a result of COVID-19 and Israel occupation practices.
Briefly, please.
فبعض النساء، بعض المجموعات النسوية والنساء الناشطات في الريف الفلسطيني في بعض القرى والبلدات قدروا يديروا أنشطة زراعية ساعد في مواقع تواجدهم.
Some of the women in those projects and gatherings were able to manage agricultural activities that help to produce resources for the areas where they are present.
وجزء آخر استطاعوا إنهم يشكلوا لجان مساندة في حالة طوارئ في بعض البلدات رغم إقصائهم عن لجان الطوارئ من قبل صنع القرار.
Other groups were able to build emergency committees in those towns. Even they were excluded from the emergency committees that were created by the decision makers.
وجزء آخر المضبوط مثل اتحاد لجان العمل الزراعي وبعض المؤسسات الأخرى عملوا نوع من التنسيق لمساعدة ودعم هاي التعاونيات النسائية.
And other groups such as the Union of Agricultural Farmers managed to provide support to those groups in implementing their actions.
سيف هلا معي وقت ولا بقدر أنهي لهون، وإذا بدهم أي أسئلة أخرى بستمع لهم؟
لا، هو حاليا طلب منك إنه تختصري بالإجابة عشان الوقت خلص. بس أنت في عندك كمان سؤال بعد شوية.
ماشي، شكرا لكم.
Thank you.
Very much. Thank you very much, Lamia. Thank you, Saif, for translating. These are very important testimonies, very moving. Abed, I'm going to turn to you to ask you, as a trade unionist, how has Kavlaoved been trying to act upon the situation of the pandemic and, of course, the impact on workers and on jobs?
Hi for everybody. My name is ABED DARI. I'm working as field coordinator for Kavlaoved Association. I will talk briefly about the workers in Israel and the settlement. There are two parts of workers, Palestinian workers. More than 100,000 workers they are in Israel, and more 35,000 work in settlements. if we want to imagine the situation for the Palestinian workers in Israel, there is a lot of problems they are facing. The 100,000 workers in Israel, they are concentrated of three parts. Construction is the main sector, and the agriculture sector and industrial sectors. They are with a permit. They getting inside Israel with a permit, and they pay for them according to the Israeli labor law. But in fact, they face a lot of problems. The main problems that they are facing, that is the fake pay slips. Usually the Palestinian workers have agreed with an employer to pay for him amount of money per day, but in fact when he writes in the pay slips the wage, it is not the same. So all the social benefits that he must be getting after that, it's according to the wage that he written in the pay slips, not in the fact that he got. So they lose a lot of their social benefits from there. The other thing that they are facing, the Palestinian workers in Israel, it's about many of them, they pay for the permit. They paid between 2,000 to 3,000 shekel per month for the permit. They're selling the permit for the Palestinians to get inside Israel. Especially in the COVID, this period, many of the Palestinian workers didn't go to the work, especially the agriculture sector and the industrial sectors. The main sectors that they stay working in Israel, it's the construction sector. Why? Because it's very essential for the Israeli authority, because most of them, they are working in construction. So they want to move the economy inside Israel. They prefer them to go to inside Israel. But what happened with these people? At the beginning, they got inside Israel, and the Israeli authorities said they must get a good place to sleep and to stay inside Israel, not to come back every day to Palestinian territories. And they should get an Israeli insurance, special Israeli insurance. But in fact, it does not happen. What happened that they sleep in the construction sites, not a good place to sleep. And about the what we call it's the insurance for if they have infected by COVID, many of them, they didn't go get them to the hospitals or to take a treatment. They sent them to the Palestinian territories, and you heard about that. The Palestinian Authority began to close the entrance and to prevent the workers to come back to Israel, because they're afraid to infect all their families. This is in common about the Palestinians who work inside Israel. In the other part of the Palestinian workers who work in settlements, if we are talking about industrial zone, there is more than 35,000 workers in the settlements. The violation of their rights in common. You can talk about a lot of companies in the settlements violate the Palestinian. They didn't pay for them the minimum wage. They didn't pay for them the social benefits. Also the fake pay slips that they established for the workers, and a lot of them have problems. Usually, what we are doing to help these workers, at the first, we are trying to give them the awareness about their rights by establishing the booklets, the flyers to to these workers about the Israeli labor law and what is your rights. And we demand for them to ask for their rights even if they are inside Israel or in the settlements. Usually, a lot of cases we try to be in contact with the employers to pay for these workers their rights. Sometimes we succeed, sometimes we didn't. So we take the cases to the court, to the Israeli labor court, and this is a long process. Take more than 1 year to 2 years to finish the cases against the employers. I want to mention about the sector of agriculture sectors. It's in the settlements or in Palestinian territories. It's in Jordan Valley. The situation is very bad there. Even they getting the minimum wage. We are talking about the minimum wage for per hour. According to the Israeli labor law, they should pay 29 shekel per hour. In the Jordan Valley area, the workers get between 10 to 12 shekel per hour. So you can see the difference. Also, they didn't pay for them the social benefits, even they didn't establish for them the pay slips. And we heard about that recently. The Israeli Minister of Law said that every workers in the Jordan Valley who want to sue his employer, he must pay a deposit in the court between 2,000 to 3,000 shekel in the court before began the court against his employer. So many of the Palestinian workers didn't have the ability to pay for this, and so they prefer to cancel their cases. About the COVID, what is in Israel, to understand the situation, in Israel, when the workers didn't have the ability to work in the COVID, in this period, they can get payment from the Israeli authority for unemployment. So any workers, Israeli workers, who have the ability to work because of the situation, the Israeli authority paid for him every month for unemployment. But what happened for the Palestinian workers? They didn't get anything. We asked the Israelis, what you will do with these workers? All the time they are working inside Israel. They didn't have the ability to work because of the situation. What you can do for them? They said they are not residents, so we cannot pay for them anything. And you know the Palestinian Authority didn't have the ability to pay for them for unemployment. So they fall between the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli Authority. No one asked for them to pay for them for the unemployment. We are talking about a period more than 4 or 5 months, how to survive their families. The other thing in this situation, there is an amount of money, we are talking about 500 million shekel collected in Israeli side for the sick days. And we go to the court, say, you have a money, you have amount of money. You can pay for the Palestinians from this amount of money. This is deducted from the Palestinian workers. Why you didn't pay for these workers? Because they didn't have the ability to work. They refused to pay for them under many of the answers, but we didn't succeed to do anything for them. The other thing, that any worker who infected from the COVID-19, according to the law, they should pay for them for the sick days. But in fact, any Palestinians who infected, they cannot pay for him because he is not residents. This is in common for the Palestinian workers. What happened with them? That's it for me.
Thank you very much. Again, thank you for all these testimonies, and which unfortunately have run twice as long as what they were supposed to run. So maybe what I'm going to do, because theoretically we only have 5 more minutes until we open the Q&A. So there were questions I wanted to ask about the annexation, and I'm going to skip that. And so Ria, I'm going to switch to you, but maybe instead of asking you about the COVID-19 situation, because we heard a lot from MOHAMMAD, LAMIA, and ABED, maybe I'm going to ask you a more general comment. I want to switch to actually, what we want to have out of this debate is what can we do here in Europe as trade unionist or as an activist. And so you work for an organization that challenges corporate complicity. So what do you think that we be asking from the UN, from governments, and from companies, and especially in the context of the database published by the UN Human Rights Council, pointing out companies involved in or with the settlements. Do you mind if we switch to this question and instead of the COVID-19?
Yes. Hi, everyone, and thank you for organizing this, and thank you for having me on board. And apologies for kind of disconnecting. This is, what it means to live in a village in the Naqab, and when it rains, the electricity is unstable. I'm going to send the link to the report that we published as Who Profits on the conditions of Palestinian workers. But I kind of wanted to say a general comment before going into the UN list, if I may.
Sure.
And I think, we were doing quite a bit of work on how the impact of COVID-19, or the shaping impact of COVID-19, and how that relates to the underlying conditions of Israel's occupation. And I think when it comes to the question of labor, Israel's strategies, Israel's colonial strategies towards the Palestinians are kind of broadly articulated in 2 forms. One, exclusion and control. So colonial policies of controlling further land, concentrating people on smaller sections of land and controlling that. But on the other hand, and simultaneously, greater economic integration and creating economic dependency, de-development of the Palestinian economy, and dependency on that of Israel. And that certainly includes employment, right? So, the OPT, the Occupied Palestinian Territory, suffers from some of the world's highest unemployment levels, 25% pre-COVID. Post-COVID, it's set to even increase even further. The level would be much higher if Palestinian workers weren't absorbed into the Israeli labor market, and the presence of an abundance supply of cheap Palestinian labor also exposes them to all sorts of forms of exploitation that were outlined here by ABED and others. And really, the integration of labor works on 2 levels. One, they serve as cheap labor for Israeli employers. But on the other hand, it serves as a bondage between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. So these workers serve as a really important source of finance for the economy of the OPT. That without them, there would be a complete economic collapse. And we really saw this in COVID, the tension between kind of needing and the desire to keep these workers in the Israeli job market, particularly the construction sector, and the attempt to kind of control the spread of COVID. And we saw this at the same time with the Palestinian Authority, right? At first, it tried to stop Palestinian workers from going and accessing these jobs, but then it realized, oh, wait a second, if these workers don't work, then there's a complete economic collapse, and we can't provide for them. And the Palestinian Authority did not include Palestinian workers in any of the kind of limited relief funds that were kind of organized for Palestinian workers in the West Bank. These workers were excluded, and at the same time, they were vilified for trying to access these jobs and to access livelihood. So workers are really kind of Palestinian workers in the Israeli economy really, they're situated in a very strange place where it's kind of they're desired at the same time, but they're not desired at the same time. So and they're positioned in a place where they can face extreme exploitation and really no protection. You're talking about Palestinian workers in Israel. They're represented by the Israeli Histadrut, that is essentially a trade union, or portrays itself as a trade union, but actually it's a colonial structure and it still treats its Palestinian members who pay dues to the Histadruts on a monthly basis. They take this from their wages without asking them if they want to be members of the Histadrut. But the Histadrut delivers no protection for these workers. I mean, 65% of the over 133,000 Palestinian workers that work in the Israeli job market work in construction. These are meant to be represented by the Histadrut, but the Histadrut delivered no protection for these workers historically, and certainly during COVID, it neglected protecting them in any kind of way. And so this reality is pre-COVID reality, but during COVID, it really went on steroids, and we saw these tensions interplaying at the same time. So I'll stop with that. I had more to say, but you can read all the reports. I'm sure there's lots of valuable information out there as well. So with regards to the UN database, the UN database is a very significant step in the right direction. I think it's important to recognize that the UN list emerged as a result and after years of civil society campaigning. It didn't emerge out of the goodwill of the UN or any other bodies. It emerged out of years of campaigning by civil society in Palestine and on a global scale. And importantly, role played by the trade union movement, globally. A lot of the trade unions in Europe, South Africa, Canada, and so on, even if they don't adopt boycott, divestment, and sanctions policies kind of as a whole, they do recognize that today corporations and private capital plays a significant role in entrenching Israel's occupation and sustaining it, and in that way violating Palestinian rights on a kind of on the whole scale, right? Where we're talking about access to land, access to resources, access to education, access to healthcare, access to family visits, prison, the kind of the mass incarceration of Palestinians, moving from Palestinian youth to women to the whole of society, the imprisonment of 2.2 million people in the besieged Gaza Strip. So internationally, there has been a move to recognize that and to act upon that. And there have been impressive campaigns to hold these corporations to account on a global scale. And so I think when we're talking about the UN list, it's important to recognize where that came from, and that came as a result of sustained labor put by international solidarity activists and Palestinian activists on the ground alike. So it's very welcomed in that sense. And so the UN list includes around 112 companies. It includes all of the Israeli major banks who actively finance the Israeli settlement enterprise and construction in settlements and so on. The list is impressive, but it's limited, and I think we have to engage with it as one that is limited. And I'll talk about a number of the limitations that the UN list has. And I guess before going into that, it's important to remember that this list is not complete, and that the UN is mandated to update this list on an annual basis. And so far, the UN has failed to do so. So again, the UN is kind of going one step forward and two steps backwards, as it does on many policies and many issues regarding regarding Palestine and regarding corporate responsibility. So it has all of these very impressive policies about the responsibilities of companies to adhere to international law and to protect human rights, but has very little ability to implement them in practice, and does very little other than producing these very nice policies. Nonetheless, the list is an important source for us to kind of rely on. But as I said, it is limited. It is limited in scope. So we know for a fact that the companies that are directly involved in Israel's settlement enterprise in all of its forms, so in its construction, in the construction of settlement homes, in establishing businesses in settlements, in the financing of settlements, in the construction and financing of infrastructure that kind of facilitates the movement between settlements and Israeli cities within the Green Line, and so on, that this list is way more than 112 companies. We as a research center that is kind of dedicated to exposing these corporations have a list of over 400 companies that are involved in these processes. So although the list is impressive, it's not comprehensive. Our own list is not comprehensive either, but it just shows that there's more to go than 112 list. Another limitation of the UN list is that it only includes 18 international companies. And this poses a question, because actually there's way more than 18 international companies that are involved in Israel's settlement enterprise. Importantly, it also lacks the inclusion of publicly traded international companies. And we know that it is the publicly traded companies that we can actually influence. It is, the influence with private companies is very limited. And so when a list is kind of full of small private Israeli companies, the power for us to influence these companies is very limited. So there's a question of kind of what is the UN trying to do with this list, right? But another limitation with the list is, I think LAMIA talked about the question of demolitions, and how demolitions is not a side event in Israel's colonial strategies. Demolitions of Palestinian homes, the demolition of Palestinian livelihoods is an integral pillar to Israel's colonial policies towards the Palestinian people. It is an integral part that derives and kind of limits people's ability to live and access livelihood. And interestingly, the UN list excludes companies that are directly involved in demolitions, for example, like Volvo. And it gives excuses that are very similar to the excuses that the companies themselves give, which is kind of another point. So it takes a conservative approach towards the question of demolition, stipulating that, and here I quote, equipment must be specifically supplied for the particular activity of demolition to be included. And now I don't know, any logical person would think that this is a red herring, right? Because Volvo doesn't, Israeli suppliers buy Volvo equipment. They don't say to Volvo, well, we're buying this because we want to demolish Palestinian homes and Palestinian solar panels in Area C and so on. And this actually goes against the UN's own guidelines on business and human rights that say that businesses have a responsibility towards the supply chain of their products. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that we should be using the list. We should be kind of excited about the fact that civil society has managed to put so much pressure, acknowledge that, and keep the pressure going towards the UN, but also not limit ourselves to companies that are listed on the UN database. For example, I know that Spanish trade unions are at the moment developing a campaign and involved in a campaign against a Spanish company, CAF, that is involved in the development of the Jerusalem light rail that is basically meant to kind of facilitate easy access between settlements, kind of the settlements around the Jerusalem belt and the Jerusalem city itself. And I think this is inspiring in the sense that trade unionists within that trade union of that specific company are taking action. And so relying on kind of the legitimacy that the UN list gives, but not limiting ourselves to the list and the paradigms and the narrative that the UN puts forward throughout this list. So yeah.
Thank you very much, Ria, for this long but very important answer to both questions. Unfortunately, time is running, and we were supposed to start the Q&A questions. I'm going to start now. Sorry, guys, that you won't have 2 questions each. So I'm going to look at the questions that have been sent by the people. There are over 100 people on Zoom and more on Facebook. So there are many questions. We won't have time for all of them. I guess we would have liked to know more about what you think we could do. But one urgent question that I have here for LAMIA is specifically about the situation in Gaza, situation for women in Gaza, but more generally the situation in Gaza, because we hear that the situation has become even worse these past few days compared to what it was already hard in the past couple of weeks or months. So LAMIA, do you have anything to say about the situation in Gaza? And Saif will translate.
هلا بالنسبة يعني بس بحب أضيف نقطة على اللي حكته ريا قبل ما أروح للسؤال أو لاستكمال الحديث عن غزة.
I would like to add a point in regards to what was mentioned earlier.
But we have really only 5 minutes.
بس لم في بس معهم 5 دقائق للمداخلة تبعتك.
بس هي يعني أنا راح أكثف في ال5 minutes هاي. أول إشي إحنا يعني مثلا النقطة اللي بتتعلق بشركات اللي بتعمل في المستوطنات ممكن يلعبوا نقابات العمال دور كتير قوي، دور كتير مهم، اللي هو بالتأكد من صناديق التقاعد تاعتهم إنها ما تكونش هاي بتدعم أو مستثمرة ضمن هاي الشركات اللي بتشتغل في المستوطنات، وقدر الإمكان يعملوا يعني على استصدار أي قانون لمنع أو للتجريم أو لأي نوع من هذا الاستثمار أو استخدام مستحقات العمال كإشي أخلاقي على الأقل في هذا الجانب.
One aspect that will be very important regards to the discussion about settlements and the colonies will be the pensions. So maybe the unions can investigate if the pensions have their banks of pensions have any investments in the colonies or settlements where they can start their campaigns in that line.
Thank you.
الجزء الثاني المضبوط اللي بيتعلق بواقع النساء بغزة، واقع السكان جميعا بغزة هو واقع صعب جدا، بالتحديد في الاحتياجات الأساسية الرئيسية لمقومات الحياة أو العيش.
The other part is talking about Gaza is basically the work that can be done to improve the basic needs of life over there.
فمنها مثلا قضية أول إشي المياه، مياه الشرب معدومة تماما الصالحة للشرب، هاي أول جزئية، يعني مياه للشرب غير متوفرة نهائيا.
The first aspect would be drinkable water that does not exist in Gaza.
الجزء الثاني إنه الكهرباء بتيجي بساعات محدودة، 4 ساعات فقط في اليوم.
The other point would be electricity, which comes very limited, 4 hours a day.
وهذا إذا بتربطه في معاناة النساء بضيف أضعاف الجهد اللي لازم تبذل النساء من أجل العيش إلى حد ما بالحفاظ على أسرهم.
And if we want to connect this with the women's struggling, so it adds a huge amount of pressure and suffering to what is already there.
الجزء الثاني انه تردي يعني حالة الحصار، منع حرية الحركة، عدم يعني تردي أوضاع اقتصادية صعبة جدا، هذا له انعكاسات من نوع آخر على حالة النساء في غزة.
The blockade, the limited rights of movement, all those restrictions in Gaza, it also has a different type of impact on the lives of women in Gaza.
في البداية زادت نسبة الفقر بشكل كبير جدا جدا.
At the beginning, the level of poverty has increased a lot.
مما جعل الأسر تحت ضغط نفسي عالي.
Which resulted in the families being under a huge psychological pressure.
لعدم قدرتهم على توفير احتياجات الأسر.
Because they are not able to provide the basic needs for their families.
مما زاد من ارتفاع نسبة العنف الأسري الداخلي.
Which resulted to increase the family violence.
وعادة يعني ضحايا العنف الأسري الداخلي هي بتكون النساء والأطفال والفئات الأكثر ضعفاً.
And normally women and children and the weakest parts of the members of the family who are the victims of such violence.
والجزء الأخير اللي هو فيما يتعلق بالجانب الصحي والخدمات الصحية في قطاع غزة.
The other aspect in Gaza would be also the health aspect and the health services in Gaza.
بسبب الحصار أول إشي في قلة في وجود الأدوية اللازمة وخاصة للأمراض المزمنة والأشياء اللي بتتعلق للأطفال.
Because of the blockade, there is a lack of medicine and treatment for more of type of permanent disease and also medicine and health material for children.
وعدم السماح للمرضى بالخروج بشكل سلس لتلقي العلاج في أماكن أخرى خارج نطاق غزة.
And the prohibition for sick people to smoothly travel seeking treatment in other locations outside of Gaza.
شكرا.
Thank you very much.
And thank you.
Thank you, Lamia.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I have a question now that I guess Mohammed could answer. It's a question about the situation in settlements. Oh, I guess Mohammed or ABED actually. But it's a question of saying, how can you both boycott the settlement and support the Palestinians who work in the settlement? I know it's a question that I often asked, but I guess people don't have the answer. So let's hear it again. Abed, do you want to go?
Yeah, it is a dilemma for us and for all of the Palestinian workers. If we want to go back to the question that there should not be the settlements. This is Arab Palestinian land, and if you say that I am for you, I am here to help you to manage your work, you stole from me my land. You stole me all the abilities to build my economy situation. So it must not be here, the settlements. So after that, you can ask me if I want to work in another places or not. So the Palestinian workers, they didn't have an ability to find the work in other places. What should they do? The Palestinian territories and the Palestinian Authority did not have the ability to manage for all the Palestinians to work inside Palestinian territories. So what should they do? They didn't have any chance to go to other places. The Israelian inside Israel, to work inside Israel, there is limited for the workers to work inside Israel. We have a huge number of workers. They didn't have, even some of the Palestinian workers didn't have the permit to get inside Israel because of political issue or something. They are forbidden to go inside Israel for security reasons, for many things. So where did they have the ability to work? So they didn't have the ability to work in another places. So they go to work inside the settlements because they didn't have the ability to work in another places. So this is a huge dilemma for the Palestinian workers, but there's no ability for them to work in another places. They want to feed their families. That's the situation.
Thank you very much.
Can I make intervention in this question, please?
Yes, of course.
Actually, I will talk as from the point of view of WAC. Okay, for us, the main economic for Palestinian it's to retain for the agriculture sector actually, and it's a chance for the whole people. I know very well that almost worker who work in the on the settlement, those people who give us or who give us chance for the settler to continue to survive in this land, because they give them a good quality and of works, and they work daily with as a Palestinian in a good way. But in my opinion, also there's a chance if you support them with a small project, an agricultural project. I mean, if they give them if also it's an handicraft project and a project that we can investigate in what he has a kind of a skill that he owned, and then we can build on to support them with a project, and in the same time the international let's say NGOs or solidarity, they can help us as a Palestinian to open the marketing channel to sell their product in the best prices. And I think that the local NGOs and even the international NGOs who work here in West Bank and Gaza, they have a capacity building to transfer the knowledge of agriculture sector for those people, or not just the agriculture sector, but I think the first opportunity that we have a land, we can protect this land by cultivating this land with such crops, and we can also create a new income or a source of income for us. But I know that the problem in this case is the marketing, and if we find a solution for a marketing, I think we can struggles in the good way against the expansion of the settlement and the protection of the land from the confiscation from the Israeli side. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So to summarize, yes, you can boycott the settlements and find other solutions for Palestinian workers. I would have liked to spend 10 more minutes for each one of you to ask you what you want, what you think would be the best for us to do. So I'm going to ask this last question to RIYA and try to ask you to answer under 5 minutes. If there was one thing, the most important thing that you think European trade unionists should do, what would that be? Thanks.
I think there's a number of things. I think there needs to be greater understanding and greater knowledge of what actually is taking place in Palestine. What does this colonial project actually mean in terms of reality on the ground and lived reality and lived conditions for people and for workers? I think at the moment there's kind of a huge sway in Europe of kind of misunderstandings and misinformations about what the question of Palestine is, what is the struggle for liberation about, what this colonial project entails, and how does it relate to kind of systems of global capitalism and global imperialism more generally. So I think there's a lot of work in terms of education that needs to take place. That's on one level. On the other level, I think campaigning. I think understanding that realities are interconnected, that we live in a globalized world, where Palestine is not just on the other side of the world territorially, but it's actually integrated to aspect of daily lives, wherever people find themselves in. And I think the ability to campaign around specific companies, the ability to exert internal democracy in trade unions, where people kind of develop their own ability to pressure their employers to act according to values which they uphold, is not just a question of solidarity with Palestine, but it's actually a question of democratizing the workplace. And I think at this moment in time, when the attacks are coming from everywhere, when trade unionists are feeling the heat wherever they find themselves, we have to be able to think about international solidarity as one that is integral in terms of solidarity with ourselves. The question of Palestine is not an isolated question from democracy on a much bigger scale, and democracy in the workplace, democracy in our countries, democracy whatever it is. So yes, campaigning, but campaigning on the question of Palestine in a much broader sense, rather than just, oh, these are the Palestinian people, they are suffering and we want to be in solidarity with their suffering, but actually be able to think about how we link solidarities together in a way that trade unionists develop campaigns that are in solidarity with Palestine, with Palestinian workers, but at the same time develop kind of better realities for themselves, right? And I think it's our ability to connect these together that is the true meaning of solidarity. Solidarity is not one-sided action. Solidarity is an action that we do that makes it better for everyone, whatever we are. And I think the question of Palestine gives us the ability to do that, and gives trade unionists the ability to do that in a very simple way, really. So I think that is the task. I think the task is one, kind of better education about what's happening in Palestine, the Zionist project, kind of the economy of the occupation and how it integrates on a global scale, but then developing our methods of solidarity, that it's not just thinking about solidarity as a one-sided action with people in need, but thinking about solidarity of how it can be a circular action. And so I think the trade unions are the most perfect platform to be engaging in this kind of sort of education and campaigning at the same time. And I think at this particular moment in time, when Palestinians are facing the whole brunt of counter-revolutions in the region, they are facing a brutal kind of colonial project that is relentless. This is the time to be acting, and the relentlessness of the attacks on Palestine is situated in a global situation where people on a global scale are being attacked relentlessly by their governments, by fascists, by their bosses. And so we have to be able to think about Palestine in that context, rather than kind of separating it as a separate element.
Thank you very much for this answer and for this lesson. It's a great way to finish. That's very much in line with what ETUN is trying to do. So I'm going to also thank all of you, all the panelists, for this excellent discussion, for the interpreters, for their work. And as ETUN, we're very happy to organize this debate. We hope to organize many more until Israel complies with international law, with human rights and the rights of the Palestinian people. Again, you can keep in touch with us by following our webpage, etun-palestine.org, or our Facebook page. Don't hesitate to ask more questions. Even after this webinar is over, we're going to stay in touch, and the discussion is never over. If your union is not a member of ETUN, it is time to convince them to join, so please do. And I would like to thank also all the participants that were listening to us, that asked questions. Sorry if your questions weren't asked. This was an excellent debate, and we are a little bit over time, but that's a good excuse to have more debates in the future. So thank you also for, in general, for supporting justice in Palestine. And I guess we can finish here and say Tahya Palestine. Thank you very much.